Work is supposed to be the daily grind that pays the bills, not the thing that ends your existence. But for these 10 absolute legends of bad decision-making, the 9 to 5 became a permanent vacation. We are diving into the most baffling, avoidable, and tragically hilarious on-the-job fatalities ever recorded. A fair warning: heavy machinery doesn't have a conscience, physics doesn't take breaks, and OSHA regulations are written in blood for a reason. Clock in, pay attention, and please, don't be like these guys. 1. Let's take a trip to the enchanting world of the night shift logistics warehouse, a place where dreams go to die and where OSHA regulations are treated with the same respect as the terms and conditions of a software update. Blindly scrolled past and ignored. It was 3 a.m. in Ohio, the witching hour for catastrophic decision-making, and we find our protagonist, Kevin. Kevin was 24, fueled entirely by lukewarm energy drinks and the kind of unearned confidence usually reserved for toddlers wearing superhero capes. He didn't view his job as moving pallets of bulk dog food. He viewed it as a nightly audition for the Fast and Furious franchise, despite the fact that his vehicle of choice had a top speed of 8 miles per hour and the handling characteristics of a shopping cart filled with bricks. Now, for those of you who haven't had the pleasure of driving a counterbalance forklift, let me give you a quick lesson in industrial physics. These machines are not cars. They steer from the rear, they weigh as much as 3 Honda Civics, and they operate on a principle called the stability triangle. As long as the center of gravity stays inside that invisible triangle, you're golden. But Kevin? Kevin treated geometry like a hater he needed to block. On this particular night, the warehouse was empty, the floors were smooth, and Kevin's boredom had reached critical mass. He decided it was time to execute the Tokyo Drift maneuver around the corner of ISIL 4. He slammed the accelerator, got the machine up to its breathtaking maximum velocity, and cranked the steering wheel hard to the left. Here is where the physics lesson becomes a eulogy. When you turn a forklift sharply at speed, the massive counterweight in the back wants to keep going straight. The center of gravity swung out of the safety triangle faster than Kevin could process the regret forming in his brain. The forklift began to tip. Now, this is the crucial moment. Every safety manual, every training video, and every old-timer with missing fingers will tell you the same thing. If it tips, stay inside. Brace your feet, hold the wheel, and ride it down. The roll cage is made of reinforced steel designed to protect you. But Kevin's lizard brain didn't consult the manual. It screamed, "Abandon ship!" In a panic-fueled attempt to beat gravity, Kevin tried to jump out of the falling side to safety. It was the worst possible move in the history of movement. The forklift, pivoting on its wheels, slammed down much faster than a human can scramble. Kevin made it halfway out before the steel roll cage, carrying 9,000 pounds of industrial hatred, introduced itself to his torso. He became a biological doorstop between the steel cage and the concrete floor. The forklift settled with a heavy metallic thud, and the warehouse returned to silence, save for the spinning of one lonely rear wheel. In his quest to be a drift king, Kevin proved that while you can ignore your boss, you cannot ignore Isaac Newton. 2. The closing shift at Burgerpocalypse is a sensory nightmare of beeping timers, slippery floors, and the lingering scent of despair and old grease. Enter Jason, a 19-year-old sandwich artist whose primary skill set involved finding creative ways to do absolutely nothing while looking busy. It was 11:55 p.m., 5 minutes to freedom, and the only thing standing between Jason and his couch was the vent hood above the fry station. It was caked in a layer of grease, thick enough to waterproof a submarine. The protocol for cleaning this was simple. Go to the back room, get the safety ladder, and wipe it down. But the back room was a staggering 40 feet away, and Jason was a man who viewed walking as a personal insult. He looked at the layout, the stainless steel prep counter on the left, the deep fryer vat on the right, and hatched a plan that was equal parts lazy and lethal. He decided to bridge the gap like a low-budget action hero. He hopped onto the prep counter, which was already slick with mayonnaise residue, and extended his left leg to place his sneaker on the thin metal rim of the fryer. Now, let's talk about the science of the deep fryer for a moment. That vat is filled with oil bubbling away at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. For context, water boils at 212. Oil at 350 doesn't just burn you, it cooks you. It clings to skin, destroys nerve endings instantly, and refuses to let go. It is essentially a pool of liquid magma waiting for a sacrifice. Jason, balancing precariously like a drunk flamingo, reached up with his rag to wipe the hood. For a fleeting second, he felt like a genius of efficiency. Then, the coefficient of friction entered the chat. His sneaker, coated in the grime of 1,000 shifts, hit a patch of slick grease on the fryer rim. There was no wobbling, no cartoonish flailing of arms. His foot simply shot out from under him. Because of his awkward stance, he didn't fall backward. He plunged forward. He went straight down, plunging legs first and torso deep into the vat of boiling oil. The reaction was horrifyingly instant. The liquid displaced by his body surged over the sides, hitting the open flames of the gas burners below. This created an immediate, massive fireball that engulfed the entire station. Jason didn't just drown, he was flash-fried in a tomb of his own making. The fire suppression system eventually kicked in, coating the kitchen in chemical foam, but it was far too late. Jason wanted to save a 2-minute trip to the closet. Instead, he cashed in his existence for the sake of avoiding a ladder, leaving behind a cautionary tale that would haunt the nightmares of fast food workers for generations. 3. The machine shop is a cathedral of raw industrial power, a place where hardened steel is peeled away like cheese by machines that possess enough torque to restart a dead planet. It is a world governed by strict rules written in the blood of previous idiots, and rule number 1 is etched in stone: no loose clothing or gloves. But Greg, a machinist with 20 years of tenure and an ego large enough to require its own zip code, believed that safety regulations were suggestions for cowards. Greg was the kind of guy who disabled safety guards because they slowed him down and viewed protective eyewear as a fashion faux pas. It was a freezing cold Tuesday morning in the unheated shop, and Greg was tasked with polishing a long steel shaft spinning at 2,000 RPM on a massive industrial lathe. His hands were cold. A rational person would put on a heater. Greg, however, decided to put on a pair of thick, heavy-duty leather welding gloves. Now, if you know anything about rotating machinery, you are currently screaming at your screen. A lathe doesn't feel. It doesn't hesitate. It has a 5-horsepower motor that doesn't care if it's spinning steel, aluminum, or Greg. If you touch a spinning part with bare skin, you might lose some skin. If you touch it with a tough leather glove, the fabric doesn't tear, it grips. It acts as a high-strength toe strap. Greg leaned in, holding a strip of emery cloth to polish the metal, his leather-clad hands hovering inches from the blur of spinning steel. He got comfortable. He got complacent. And then the fingertip of his glove brushed against a microscopic burr on the shaft. It happened faster than a neuron could fire a signal to his brain. The lathe snagged the leather. In a fraction of a millisecond, the glove tightened, wrapping around the shaft and taking Greg's hand with it. There was no time to reach for the emergency stop. The immense torque of the machine jerked Greg forward with the violence of a car crash. His arm wrapped around the spindle, and because the leather wouldn't rip and his bones were weaker than the steel bed, his entire body was pulled into the machine. He was whipped around the shaft like a wet towel in a spin cycle, his body slamming repeatedly against the heavy iron bed of the lathe with every revolution. The machine didn't bog down. It didn't stall. It just kept spinning, efficiently processing Greg along with the workpiece. By the time a co-worker killed the power, the silence in the shop was heavy and final. Greg had kept his hands warm, sure, but he had paid for it by becoming a permanent part of the inventory, proving that in a wrestling match with industrial torque, the machine remains undefeated. 4. The office chair. DIY, let's talk about the soul-crushing ecosystem of middle management. A beige purgatory where dreams are filed away in triplicate, and the highlight of the week is finding a donut in the break room that isn't visibly stale. In this fluorescent-lit kingdom, we meet Gary, a 45-year-old regional sales manager whose frugality was the stuff of legends. Gary was the kind of guy who washed disposable paper plates and viewed expiration dates as mere suggestions from the government. His throne in this kingdom was a standard-issue ergonomic mesh office chair that had seen better days. Specifically, the hydraulic lift had failed, meaning that every time Gary sat down, he would slowly, sadistically sink 3 inches until his chin was resting on his desk like a toddler at a grown-up dinner. Now, a sane person would fill out a requisition form for a new chair. A slightly less sane person would steal a chair from a vacant cubicle. Gary, however, chose option C, the MacGyver solution. He decided that he, a man whose only tool experience involved assembling a prefab bookshelf backwards, could fix this complex piece of pneumatic engineering himself. He flipped the chair over, revealing the gas cylinder, the shiny metal tube responsible for the lifting action. To Gary, it looked like a simple metal pipe that just needed a stopper. To anyone with a basic understanding of physics or mechanics, it was a high-pressure bomb waiting for a trigger. You see, that cylinder is filled with highly compressed nitrogen gas, sitting at around 2,000 psi. That's roughly the same pressure as a scuba tank, or the bite of a great white shark, compressed into a tube the size of a salami. Gary's plan was breathtakingly stupid. He would drill a hole through the metal column and insert a bolt to physically stop the chair from sinking. It was a permanent fix for a temporary problem. He dragged the chair to the maintenance closet, grabbed a power drill, and selected a metal piercing bit. He lined it up right in the center of the cylinder and pulled the trigger. The drill bit whirred, biting into the steel. Metal shavings curled away. Gary probably felt a surge of masculine pride as he forced his will upon the furniture. He was showing this chair who was boss. But, as the drill bit pierced the inner chamber, physics filed a grievance. The structural integrity of the cylinder failed instantly. The pressurized gas inside didn't just leak out, it exploded with the violence of a cannon shot. The internal piston rod, liberated from its housing by the sudden catastrophic decompression, was launched upward with lethal velocity. It shot through the plastic seat base, tore through the foam cushion, and entered Gary's body at a speed usually reserved for ballistics testing. The force was so immense, it threw him backward into the drywall, pinning him there like a butterfly in a collection case. It was a 1 in a million shot, a perfect bullseye of bad luck and worse judgment. Gary had wanted a chair that wouldn't let him down. Instead, he built a surface-to-air missile launcher and sat directly on the launch pad. In his quest to save the company $50, he ended up costing them a window, a chair, and the price of a hazardous materials cleanup crew, proving once again that when you try to outsmart a pressurized vessel, the vessel always has the final, explosive word. 5. The pallet wrapper. Mummy. The night shift at a massive distribution center is a lawless wasteland where boredom is the enemy and common sense is the first casualty of war. Enter Tyler, a 22-year-old warehouse associate whose brain was essentially a browser with 50 tabs open, and half of them were frozen. Tyler worked in the shipping department, home to the automated pallet wrapper, a massive rotating turntable designed to spin heavy pallets of cargo while a robotic arm dispenses industrial-strength plastic wrap. It's a mesmerizing machine, spinning round and round, turning chaotic stacks of boxes into neat, shiny monoliths. To Tyler, however, it wasn't a tool for logistics, it was a carnival ride waiting to happen. It was 4 a.m., the supervisors were asleep in the office, and Tyler had an idea that would make a safety inspector weep openly. He shouted to his coworkers, "Hey, bet I can surf this thing," and hopped onto the turntable next to a stack of crates. Now, the machine has a pressure sensor, but Tyler, being a problem solver, had bypassed it with a cleverly placed brick. He hit the green button. The table began to spin. At first, it was hilarious. Tyler was spinning, laughing, doing his best surfer pose. But then, the plastic wrap carriage descended. This machine isn't designed to gently drape plastic like you're saving leftovers. It's designed to secure loads for interstate transport. It uses a pre-stretch gear system that pulls the plastic tight, really tight, stretching it by 300% before applying it. This creates thousands of pounds of crushing force to ensure boxes don't shift. As Tyler spun, his baggy, unauthorized hoodie fluttered in the breeze. The sticky, high-tension plastic caught the fabric. In a split second, the joke was over. The wrap snagged him and pulled him tight against the crates. He tried to pull away, but the turntable kept spinning, 12 revolutions per minute, relentless and unfeeling. The first layer pinned his arms to his sides. He couldn't reach the emergency stop. The second layer pinned his legs. He tried to scream, but the third layer covered his mouth. The machine, doing exactly what it was programmed to do, continued its cycle, wrapping layer after layer of industrial-grade cling film around him. With every rotation, the pressure increased. It wasn't just holding him, it was compressing him. It squeezed the air out of his lungs and refused to let him inhale again. It was a snake constricting its prey, but mechanical and powered by three-phase electricity. His co-workers were laughing, thinking it was part of the act, until they noticed his face turning a color that isn't found in nature. By the time they hit the kill switch and cut him out, Tyler had been packaged, sealed, and prepared for shipment to the afterlife. He died of traumatic asphyxia, squeezed to death by the very product he was supposed to be shipping. He wanted to be the center of attention. Instead, he became a perfectly wrapped, palletized example of why we don't treat heavy machinery like playground equipment. 6. The industrial oven shortcut. In the high-stakes world of commercial baking, time is money, and heat is the currency. We find ourselves at Grandma's Cookie Factory, a massive industrial facility that churns out enough sugar to give diabetes to a small country. The heart of this operation is the tunnel oven, a 100-foot-long gas-fired beast that operates at a steady 400 degrees Fahrenheit. It's essentially a portal to hell that smells like cinnamon and regret. On this fateful day, a conveyor belt jammed deep inside Zone 3 of the oven. The alarm blared, and production ground to a halt. Enter Bob, the line maintenance technician. Bob was a man who viewed safety protocols as corporate red tape, designed to slow down his genius. The correct procedure for a jam was clear. Shut down the gas, open the vents, lock out the power, and wait 4 hours for the oven to cool down to a human-safe temperature. But Bob didn't have 4 hours. Bob wanted to go to lunch. He checked the external temperature gauge. It read 150 degrees Fahrenheit inside. That's just a sauna, Bob reasoned, displaying a fundamental misunderstanding of biology and thermodynamics. I'll just crawl in, kick the tray loose, and crawl out. 5 minutes, tops. He grabbed a wrench and shimmied into the mouth of the oven like a spelunker entering a dragon's throat. He crawled on the metal grating, the residual heat radiating from the fire bricks soaking into his uniform instantly. Now, 150 degrees might sound survivable for a few minutes in dry air, but inside a confined, insulated steel tunnel, the radiant heat is relentless. It doesn't just warm you, it cooks you from the outside in. By the time Bob reached the jam, 50 feet inside, he was already in trouble. His body temperature skyrocketed. He became disoriented, the classic first symptom of heat stroke. He managed to knock the tray loose, fixing the jam. Success. But in his confused state, instead of crawling out, he just laid down on the belt to catch his breath for a second. The heat had scrambled his brain. And here is where the tragedy turns ironic. The oven's control system, detecting that the jam sensor was cleared and the resistance was gone, automatically restarted the conveyor belt. Bob didn't have to crawl out anymore. The machine was happy to deliver him. He passed out from the heat stroke long before he reached the active burners in Zone 4, which is a small mercy, I suppose. He slowly rode the belt through the entire baking cycle, emerging at the packaging end as a grim, perfectly baked cautionary tale. Bob wanted to save time, and in a way, he did. He skipped the rest of his shift, his career, and his life, proving that when the sign says, "Danger high heat," it's not a challenge, it's a promise. 7. The skylight nap. Let's ascend to the baking hot roof of a sprawling industrial warehouse in Phoenix, Arizona, a place where the sun beats down with the intensity of a laser weapon and the tar paper smells like melting tires and bad decisions. Here we find Dave, a 40-year-old HVAC repairman whose work ethic was largely theoretical and whose understanding of structural engineering was non-existent. Dave had been sent up to fix a rattling AC condenser, a job that should have taken 20 minutes. But Dave operated on Dave time, which meant 20 minutes of work followed by a 2-hour union-mandated nap to recover from the exhaustion of climbing the ladder. He scanned the roof for a resting spot. The AC unit was vibrating too much. The gravel was too sharp for his delicate back. But then he saw it. A row of domed skylights. To Dave, these weren't fragile windows designed to let in light. They were ergonomic, sun-warmed recliners perfectly shaped for the human spine. He approached one particularly inviting skylight, completely ignoring the faded, peeling sticker that screamed, "Danger, fragile materials, do not sit or stand," in bright red letters. Dave treated warning labels like he treated dietary advice, as background noise to be filtered out by his superior intellect. He reasoned, with the confidence of a man who failed high school physics, that it's thick plastic, it holds off the rain, surely it can hold off a full-grown man seeking a siesta. What Dave failed to account for was the relentless, silent power of ultraviolet radiation. You see, this skylight had been baking in the Arizona sun for 30 years. The polycarbonate, once flexible and strong, had been chemically degraded on a molecular level. It had the structural integrity of a stale potato chip. Dave laid his heavy tool belt down, sat on the edge, and then leaned back, putting his full 200-pound weight right onto the geometric center of the dome. He closed his eyes, ready to drift off into a peaceful slumber. For about 3 seconds it was comfortable. Then, the silence of the roof was shattered by a sound like a gunshot. The brittle plastic didn't bend. It disintegrated. It shattered into 1,000 jagged shards, instantly removing the only barrier between Dave and gravity. There was no time to grab the ledge, no time to regret his life choices, no time to wake up from his nap. Dave fell through the hole he had just created, plummeting 30 feet, that's 3 stories, straight down into the empty concrete warehouse below. He landed on the unyielding floor with a wet thud that echoed through the empty building, turning a maintenance call into a crime scene cleanup. The irony here is thick enough to cut with a knife. Dave went up to the roof to fix a cooling system, but he ended up crashing the system entirely. He wanted a few minutes of rest. Instead, he found eternal rest, proving that while the sun gives life, it also turns safety plastic into a trapdoor given enough time, and gravity is always waiting for you to make a single, lazy mistake. 8. The human torch. Smoke break. The spray booth at a high-end auto body shop is a temple of chemistry, a sealed environment where air is filtered and paint is atomized into a fine, colorful mist. It is also, by definition, a room filled with highly flammable vapors that require strict safety protocols. Enter Mike, a veteran car painter who was excellent at laying down a glass-smooth clear coat, but absolutely terrible at risk assessment. Mike had just finished spraying a '69 Mustang in Inferno Red, a fitting name for the catastrophe that was about to unfold. Mike was wearing a full-body Tyvek suit, a respirator, and gloves. Safety gear designed to keep the paint off his skin and the fumes out of his lungs. However, Mike was also a 2-pack-a-day smoker, and he had been in the booth for an hour. The nicotine withdrawal was hitting him harder than the solvent fumes. Desperate for a fix, he stepped out of the booth into the alleyway behind the shop. He peeled off his mask, took a deep breath of fresh air, and reached for his lighter. Here is the critical error in Mike's logic, the fatal flaw in his reasoning. He assumed that because he was outside the booth, the danger was gone. He forgot that for the last hour he had been standing in a cloud of atomized clear coat and reducer. His Tyvek suit wasn't just white fabric anymore, it was a sponge. It was saturated with volatile organic compounds. A micro-layer of flammable mist clung to every fiber of his being, turning him into a walking, breathing candle wick soaked in gasoline. Mike put the cigarette to his lips and flicked his cheap butane lighter. The spark was tiny, barely visible in the daylight. But to the cloud of fumes radiating off his suit, that spark was a nuclear detonation. The ignition didn't start at the cigarette. It enveloped him. The fumes on his suit caught fire instantly, creating a flashover effect. In less than a second, Mike was engulfed in a ball of blue and orange flame. The synthetic Tyvek suit didn't just burn, it melted, shrinking onto his skin and fusing with it like napalm. He tried to run, to stop, drop, and roll, but you cannot roll away from a fire that is wearing you. By the time his co-workers heard the screams and hit him with a fire extinguisher, the damage was catastrophic. Mike wanted a quick smoke to relax. Instead, he became the smoke, providing a horrific high-temperature lesson on the persistence of volatile chemicals and the absolute stupidity of mixing open flames with industrial solvents, no matter where you are standing. 9. The car crusher looter. The scrapyard is a graveyard for machines. a place of rust, sharp edges, and heavy equipment designed to turn cars into cubes. It's a dangerous place on a good day, but for Eddie, a yard worker with sticky fingers and a light wallet, it was a treasure chest. Eddie's job was to prep cars for the crusher, removing fluids, mercury switches, and batteries. But Eddie had a side hustle. He would rescue the best batteries and sell them on the black market for cash. On this particular Tuesday, the yard was busy. The massive hydraulic baler, a machine that exerts 2,500 pounds of pressure per square inch, was running non-stop. Eddie spotted a pristine, brand-new die-hard battery under the hood of a sedan that was already loaded onto the crusher's infeed ramp. The operator was looking the other way. The cycle had already started. The heavy steel lid was slowly lifting to accept the car. A smart man would let the battery go. A rational man would realize that $50 isn't worth dying for. Eddie, however, did the math differently. He decided he could beat the machine. He sprinted over and dove into the crush chamber, scrambling over the hood of the condemned car like an action hero in a discount movie. He popped the hood latch, wrenched the terminal cables off, and grabbed the heavy lead-acid battery. He was fast, but he wasn't hydraulic fast. He turned to jump out, clutching his $50 prize, but his boot snagged on a rusted piece of trim near the wheel well. He stumbled. That 1-second delay was the difference between a close call and a closed casket. The crusher doesn't have eyes. It doesn't have mercy. It operates on a timer. The massive steel lid, weighing tons and driven by pistons the size of tree trunks, began its descent. Eddie screamed, but the roar of the diesel engine drowned him out. The lid came down, compressing the sedan and Eddie into a neat, dense rectangle of scrap metal. The machine finished its cycle and ejected the bale. Somewhere inside that block of compressed steel was a very flat Eddie and a perfectly good battery that no one would ever use. He risked his existence for the price of a tank of gas, proving that in the game of man versus machine, the machine always has the crushing advantage and it never bluffs. 10. The crane counterweight ride. Construction sites are strictly regulated environments, especially when you're talking about tower cranes, those massive steel giants that loom over the skyline. But for Steve, a steel worker with a penchant for hiding during his lunch break, the crane was just a really tall park bench with a killer view. It was a beautiful, windy day on the 40th floor of a new skyscraper, and Steve wanted a lunch spot without his foreman breathing down his neck. He looked at the tower crane and spotted the counterweight deck, the massive concrete block at the rear of the crane's jib that balances the load. It was flat, spacious, and offered a panoramic view of the city. It seemed perfect. Steve climbed the service ladder, hopped onto the concrete slab, and unwrapped his ham sandwich, dangling his legs over the edge like a kid on a dock. He was in paradise. What Steve failed to communicate to anyone, specifically the crane operator sitting in the cab just 20 feet away, was his location. The operator, believing he was clear to work, received a radio call to move a load of steel beams from the north side to the west side. He engaged the slew motors. The crane began to rotate. Now, physics dictates that when a long object rotates, the ends move much faster than the center. Steve felt the movement and grabbed the concrete, but he wasn't worried yet. He just thought he was getting a free ride. Then, the operator reached the target and slammed the brakes to stop the swing. This is where inertia enters the chat. The crane stopped. The counterweight stopped. Steve, however, was a loose object in motion, and according to Newton's first law, he wanted to stay in motion. The sudden deceleration acted like a catapult. Steve slid across the concrete block. He clawed at the smooth surface, but there was nothing to grab. No railings, no handles, because nobody is supposed to be sitting there. He slid right off the edge. He had a solid 6 seconds of free fall to contemplate the physics of inertia and the poor quality of his sandwich before he introduced himself to the pavement 40 stories below. He wanted a lunch break with a view. He ended up becoming part of the landscape, a tragic reminder that heavy machinery is not street furniture, and unauthorized break rooms often come with a fatal exit strategy. That is the end of the shift. Now I want you to name and shame. We all know that one coworker who shouldn't be trusted with a stapler, let alone heavy machinery. In the comments, I want to know, What is the single most dangerous thing you have ever seen a coworker do and somehow survive? Expose the idiots. Smash that like button if you value your limbs, and subscribe so you don't miss the next mandatory safety briefing. Stay safe, or at least stay entertaining.